Zoetic Press presents Alphanumeric, the fiction and poetry podcast featuring pieces selected from the award-winning NonBinary Review. Today, In the Church Library by Zary Fekete. Brunel was brushing away a gray hair when the women entered the church library on Tuesday night. There were 3, and they always dragged their chairs to the same places no matter how the room was arranged. Artis sat by the wall of children's Bible drawings. Rose and Patricia sat on either side of the door as if they were ready to leave. No one else ever came. They'd been meeting for 3 weeks. Before Brunel could ask, Artis was already complaining about the poem from last time. "He's so vulgar," Artis clucked. "Look at this, look at what he writes." She gestured with the poem book while pointing with a long finger. "What don't you like?" Brunel asked. "It's the whole thing." Artis was tapping the guilty page repeatedly as she spoke. She looked quickly at the other 2 women before dropping her eyes to the page and reading out loud. "This, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man. Filthy! I could wring his neck." The hour dragged by in hitches and puffs. Artis packed up her purse to leave and turned to Brunel. "No more Yeats, please." And she left. That evening at home, Brunel took out the poem book. She turned back to the poem. She still felt like she was new to the experience of reading these verses. Since last summer, in order to avoid certain thoughts, she had tried various things. First, it had been gardening, but everything died. She had also tried stamps, but the tired, tiny pictures left her exhausted. Father Haverstock had said that there were a fair many other women in the parish who were recently widowed. It might be nice to provide something, some kind of outlet. He had finished the thought by reciting a psalm, something like, "The Lord knows the brokenhearted and sits by the crushed in spirit." Brunel couldn't quite remember how it went, but she got the idea. "Wasn't that poetry?" she had said. "Yes, perhaps," he smiled. And so the idea for the weekly poetry club was hatched. Several women said that they would come, but in the end, only Artis, Rose, and Patricia showed up. Artis's husband had died last year. Rose and Patricia weren't married, they were just lonely. Brunel put the Yeats book back on her bedside table, and she clicked off the light. It took her a while to fall asleep. As she stared out at the dark room, she remembered snatches and bits of the poems from the last 3 weeks. She also remembered what the women had said. She made a few mental notes. Poets tried: Yeats, Pinsky, and Oliver. Poems tried: The Second Coming, Shirt, and The Lamb. Poets rejected: all 3. Reasons given: The Second Coming was vulgar. It sounded dangerous, according to Artis. "It is," thought Brunel with a small smile. Shirt was confusing. Too many uses of seamstress language like the presser, the cutter, the wringer, the mangle. To be sure, Brunel didn't understand all these words either, but she liked the way they sounded. The Lamb was a temptress. Artis had said, "High school children might get a hold of it and make out." Brunel thought this was very funny, but she knew what Artis meant. It was kind of seductive. The lamb in the poem had chosen wrong. Brunel recalled the pregnant line, "And not till I lay, swelled and cracked on the grass, did I guess what I had eaten." She really didn't have a tremendously firm grasp on her intentions. She just knew that it might be meaningful to disrupt their schedules a bit. They sat church on Sundays. They had bridge on Thursdays. They hoped for visits from family on Saturdays, but much of the rest of the week was, frankly, empty. As Brunel finally drifted off to sleep, she decided to try one more poet with the women next week. If she got the same response, maybe she might abandon the poetry club altogether. The next Tuesday, Brunel was waiting in the church library with 4 copies of a poem in her hand. Artis arrived first as usual and situated herself by the Bible verses. The 2 women made small talk until Rose and Patricia arrived and sat down like door guardians. Brunel took a deep breath. She handed out the copies. Artis glanced at the paper and looked up confused. "Who wrote it?" Brunel gave her a small smile. "Let's just try it." Would anyone be willing to read it out loud for the rest of us? There was a pause while the three women glanced over the poem on the page. There was a pleasant silence that settled over the library. Artis looked up. "I'll read it." The women settled into place while Artis flicked the paper straight. She adjusted her glasses and began to read. Odd. There is a me that knew and a me that did not know, that in the doorway it was crouching, a silky venom. I was still young and left my family only once to teach the men. Day after day I drank, I ate, wild honey from the cleft, broiled fish and forbidden wheat. There were grapes and figs, wine and a terrible flatbread. And finally, when I was on the tree, I knew the cup. Not until the 9th hour did I feel the fell weight of the world. I cried out just one time. I couldn't help it. He wasn't there. Strange. Artis finished reading. Her eyes flicked back over the page a few times. It's very simple, isn't it? Rose was sitting thoughtfully. Patricia had taken out her Bible and was fishing through it for something. She seemed to have found it, paused as she read something, then sat back in silence. Artis gave Brunel a look. I like it, she said. Who wrote it? I did, Brunel said. This has been In the Church Library by Zary Fekete, read for you by Lisa Quintana. Our music was No Shame by Tattooed Preacher, provided by Pixabay.com. Alphanumeric is a production of Zoetic Press, mixed and mastered by Lisa Quintana. Head on over to our website, zoeticpress.com, and get this piece and all the other poetry, prose, and art in issue 28, Person First in an Identity First World. Or you can get all the issues of NonBinary Review. Every single one of them is great. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, rate. It helps other folks find us, and it makes us love you so much. NonBinary Review, because humans are hardwired to tell stories.